Systems thinker Donella Meadows famously observed that a system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets, which means when citizens see dysfunction, polarization, institutional distrust, or government paralysis, the right question is not just who failed. The deeper question is what incentives and structures produce the outcomes we're seeing. Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's May 11th, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Morning, Eric. I am right as rain. And in Austin, it is not raining today, so that's awesome. I think I've said before that in my apartment in downtown Austin, I overlook Longhorn Stadium. And we just finished graduation week here in Austin. Really proud of my daughter, Casey, who just became Dr. Casey. And I had a chance to speak at her convocation. But just graduation, beginnings, endings, starts, celebrations, families. It is really fun to be in a college town during graduation. And I will say, I watched the stadium fill up and go all the way into the night with fireworks and drone shows. And I don't know, it just made me feel really bouncy, hope for the future. I know a lot of kids of friends who are graduating, and we have a lot of things we need to solve in America and in the world, but boy, just the raw material that's coming through is really pretty exciting. So I'm bouncy.
Nice. Congratulations to the class of 2026, and
Indeed.
really a great time to come into the world, right? With AI and different things to shorten your learning curve in whatever industry you're getting into, and also challenging times. So get out there and don't it up.
Yeah, exactly. I say this all the time is I wish I could start again. And that has nothing to do with the joy I've had in my life. I've said this over and over again. I've just had the best life, the luckiest girl. Things that I've gotten to do that I couldn't have imagined. But this is a really exciting time, and I would love to be starting anew in this moment because the disruption is also the time when the best things happen, and I am kind of jealous.
I also wanted to wish you a belated Happy Mother's Day. Also to my mother, who's one of the few people who actually listens to us.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. There's a few of y'all. And also to my wife. So Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Yeah, it's the best job ever. I'm pretty sure that I speak on behalf of your mom and your wife. And it's just the best, right? Even on days it's impossible. It's just the best. As I said, the love may be impossible, but the rewards are resplendent. So thanks, Eric.
All right. What are we talking about today?
Okay, we spent a lot of time on the show talking about what's changing. Today, what we want to talk about is how to think about it. And we've alluded to this along the way. I think what we have said is in a world moving this fast, the advantage doesn't belong to the loudest voices, even though they like to believe it does. It belongs to the people asking better questions. So over the next few episodes, and we've promised this, Eric, and we're actually starting today.
Delivering,
that's us. We're going to take 4 areas that we talk about all the time: AI, cyber, budgets, and governance. And instead of just updating you on what happened, we're going to show you how to read those stories differently. And then we're even going to offer you some questions that you might ask of policymakers and lawmakers who want the opportunity to represent you.
Let's get to it. So, Sue, how is the news presented to us normally for our consumption?
So news arrives as fragments. So let's just think about it. Tariffs, semiconductor restrictions, rare earth supply chains, each reported as a separate story. But together, they're really one signal: nations rewiring around strategic, technological, and economic dependency. Now, most people consume news as spectators, and I get asked all the time, I'm sure you do, of how do you listen to the news? And what I usually answer trying to tell people where I go to look for sources, how I think through them. And I think that's a good beginning of an answer. I try and listen to everything, especially that which I don't think I believe, because I never want to just seek confirmation bias. But we still tend to react to the headlines, and even in that approach, we're reacting to the headlines. But the goal is to consume it as a system observer, someone who looks for the pattern underneath the fragments.
So when I see a headline about new tariffs on potential Chinese EVs, electric vehicles, what should I be doing differently than just reading it and either going to an alternate source or reading it and just moving on?
I'm going to try and articulate a framework. And these are actually really reminiscent of the Heilmeyer cataclysm that DARPA uses to question new projects before they take them on. So this idea of systems thinking is pretty good. The first one is, what problem is actually being solved? So let's talk about your China tariff EV question. Ask yourself, is it about protecting the American auto workers? Or is it about national security or industrial capacity? Or preventing dependence on Chinese batteries and supply chains, or buying time for U.S. manufacturing to scale? Because in each of those areas, heck, I think we've talked about each of those areas.
Yeah.
That's why you care about the story. And it works even if you don't go, oh my gosh, this is really important. Sometimes you're going to say, yeah, this really doesn't change any of the things I already know. But if you break it down into what problem it's actually trying to address, you're going to be able to more quickly decide whether you want to pay attention to this or not. One of the things I always look at is that question of preventing dependence on Chinese batteries and supply chains. Anything we do in the area of EVs, we do not have either the supply chain coming in or the infrastructure here to support it. So no matter what you do on the front end of tariffs, what are you affecting? Are you making it better or worse for us? And where's the story that's going to go along with that? So that's the reason I like asking what problem is being solved, because it lets me know whether it's important to me, know whether I've heard it before, and know whether I need to look someplace else to find some more information. How about you?
No, I think that's a great place to start. And sometimes you won't be able to see it within that article or in
Right.
that story itself, right? And you also have to guard against that confirmation bias, because if you're a United Auto worker, right, you're probably going to be shifted or more likely to see it through that lens.
I will say, Eric, you and I in this episode, and we talk all the time about people getting used to using AI. This is a great use of whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of the LLMs to say, hey, what other articles relate to this?
Yeah.
What can teach me more about that? And it'll go brick and it'll be there. So start with what problem you think it's talking about. The second one is, what assumptions must be true for this to work? So I've identified the problem I think they're working on. Now, what assumptions have to be true? On Chinese tariffs and EV, you'd have to assume that our domestic industry can actually ramp up fast enough if we decide that we're going to actually not want to import things. And allies will align with us, and consumers will tolerate higher prices because, man, it costs more here. China can't simply route production through third countries. That restrictions on semiconductors advance the actual Chinese advantage rather than accelerate self-sufficiently, that kind of not question. So let's say that you think it's going to solve the problem, and the problem we want solved is bringing manufacturing and reduce dependence on foreign stuff. Then what are we assuming we have here? And I believe it's on this one question of what assumptions have to be true that is the biggest source of disconnect for most people.
Mhm.
Right? Because why would we be talking about it if we weren't ready to assume it? Every time they talk about, well, factories are being built. Yeah, and how long is it going to be before those factories are in place? And what talent supply chain do we have for those? So what assumptions must be true for it to work? Third question I ask is, what incentives are driving the behavior? China wants market share. Do you understand that when you go into the negotiations? They want industrial dominance and leverage over future infrastructure. The U.S. wants resilient supply chains and strategic independence. Companies want predictability. That, maybe because I'm in the middle of, just came off board season, I cannot tell you how important that is for companies. Is the market going to be open and closed to me? Am I going to get something on time or I'm not? Do I have the capital that I need, and how long does it need to last me before I'm gonna get revenue? So companies want predictability. Politicians want jobs in their districts. We don't think of this enough. All those representatives sitting in Congress, they represent a state. Do you really think that all the things we buy are because the government wants to buy them in a particular state? Or perhaps the Congress says, in order for me to budget you money for it, it's going to have to be produced in my state. So understanding where the jobs are going, because that is a big determinant of things. And allies want access to both markets without having to choose sides. And I think when we talk about the great rewiring, and we won't talk about it today, but just watching what NATO is doing in response to these unclear, non-predictable counter forces in trade, you're seeing the choices they're making. And the choice they seem to be making is, looks like the U.S. is the source of non-predictability. Even if we have provided advantage in the past, if we're not predictable, they're going to have to go a different way.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that you can pull that out of just a headline about tariffs on EVs or Ford considering partnering with BYD on building electric vehicles in the United
Yeah.
States. What problem is actually being solved? What assumptions must be true for this to work? What incentives are driving the behavior? And what are the second order effects that follow? You can really see a lot of those second and third order effects from asking those first three questions.
Eric, don't you think if you just start practicing a little, it becomes really obvious where the gaps are? You don't always see incongruities right away, but you will see what isn't present, and you will very quickly start thinking about whether that matters.
Then let's put it to work and start with one everybody's talking about, but very few people are thinking about structurally in the lens of AI. So we've got Waymo, Tesla, and Zoox, that's Amazon's owned, major players in the Robotaxi. The promise was enormous, the demos were impressive, the technology worked in controlled conditions, but deployment has been slower, harder, and messier than anyone projected. Waymo autonomous vehicles have legally passed stopped Austin Independent School District school buses with flashing red lights and stop arms extended at least 24 times as of January 2026, and that's triggered an NTSB safety investigation. So, little example here close to home.
Yeah.
So, Sue, using our questions, what problem is AI actually solving here?
Here's what we see, right? We're seeing the technology has failed in controlled conditions. What we know is the world is not controlled or actually controllable. And so winners and losers become very different about, is the winner going to be the person that invented AI, or they'll be the person who can field it, or the one who makes it trustworthy or can integrate it or to govern it and to adopt with it. So the first thing is we got to get beyond the technology. And what's interesting about your example, it isn't even about saying, well, the technology is not good enough, because there's just no way. Back to this thing. It's not, yes, the technology failed, but it was the conditions are unlikely to be as predictable. It needs to create a technology that will do it. So some questions to apply. What task is AI actually improving? Does it reduce labor or augment expertise? Who owns the data? What happens when the model is wrong? Can humans override it? Is it a demo or is it deployable? So in your story, yes, it's about that action, but do we even know why we needed it and how hard we need to work to fix it and who's benefiting from it? So I think the insight here is AI isn't hard when it's controlled. AI is hard when the world becomes unpredictable. Let's dive in even a little further. Let's say the car performs on a test track or map city grid, but a construction zone with a human flagman is waving you into oncoming traffic. A kid chasing a ball between the parked cars, the school buses. This isn't a car problem. It's the AI problem. Every sector is hitting this same wall, whether it's healthcare or defense or finance and education. The demo works, but the deployment doesn't scale. And the reason is always the same, because the real world doesn't hold still for your model.
Yeah, and it sounds like we need to do a little expectation management too, right? AI, it's neither going to take all of our jobs nor solve all of our problems because there's variance in the conditions and different things happen in the real world than in the test track. So, this is that question we set up earlier, Sue. Is this scalable or performative?
It's just such a good question. It's coming. The question I ask myself on that scalability performative issue is, are there conditions that we control in which it will perform and in which we can trust it? Everyone's pouring resources into AI, but the race isn't about who has the best model in a lab, right? There are great models everywhere. To me, it's a question of risk. When you look at it, can you bear the consequence of being wrong? Too often, technology is set up against perfection, right? We can't have any accidents. Well, in the city of Austin, how many accidents do you think are going to occur today? Is it more or less than the number that the Waymos have? Right. So to me, the first big question about AI is kind of what are your expectations for it, as you said. But the second question is, are there controlled elements that you can put in where the technology has proven to be successful within the variables of the environment you have? I think the fact that there are Waymos that you can get via Uber in the city of Austin means that, by and large, that is a controlled environment, 35 miles an hour with lots of stoplights, that we can imagine that when there's an error, that error won't be catastrophic. Have we defined how good it needs to be to get it moving at speed and at volume? And so to me, that's one of the biggest questions is the demo isn't the capability because you're demonstrating the technology. What you need to do is, are we seeing examples of it being in uncontrolled environments? It's almost like wargaming or red teaming, right? How many times have you done it with a weapon system or a communication system? You just run somebody against it who's trying to create the events. How do we do that? When is it going to be enough? And when is the congestion in the city of Austin or the availability of drivers going to be so much that we have to take the risk anyway? And how do we talk about it? So when you read that story about technology that isn't performing as expected in a real world environment, the question should be asking is, how does it compare to what happens outside of automation? And then the other question is, can I bear the risk of it going wrong? And if the story never puts those in context, you now have the question that you need to go answer for yourself to know how much you want to commit to that technology. And as you said, every sector is facing this now. This same brick wall is what's being hit. Interestingly enough, we aren't getting enough data out of war zones or certainly out of the Iran crisis to know there is so much AI being used there. How effective is it? What is the cost of it? So I think the first question you ask when you see a technology like AI is, how controlled is the environment it's being tested in? And when it fails, is it the environment or the technology? And then ask the question about, can we imagine getting to a place that we could control it in a real world environment? And then is that a risk you can assume and walk down that chain? And if there's no discussion of it, then you need to go further.
Yeah. Do we need to figure out some ones and zeros to keep the Waymos from going around stop school buses? Yes. But of the percentage of cars on the road versus percentage of Waymos, how many drivers in that same period went around school buses, human controlled drivers went around
Right.
school buses compared to robotaxis? And some of it may just come down to the limited amount of data, right? We've only been running autonomous cars for, I don't know how long they've been collecting it, but it's not been more than 10 years, right? So they've got to get more data to then train to then be able to make safe models to go up to speed, like you said. And then it comes down to the question of who owns the data.
And for what purpose is that data being collected, right? And is the purpose of the data being collected the purpose of safety or the purpose of the next generation advance that isn't even in the domain of safety or those cars? So again, when you think about this as a system, not just the technology of the car itself, but the data and the data rights and the data use. And how do you see this coming out? For example, have you ever gone around a school bus? Have you missed its flashing signs? I mean, in Virginia, all they had was one little red stop sign that came out, and I missed it one time. It didn't result in tragedy, so is every miss the same? Number of misses that are catastrophic? Was there more data involved? And so to me, how is the data being analyzed, by whom, and for what purpose? And is the purpose of that data collection for safety or for sales or for another technology in another domain? And who gets to see it? That's another thing. Because it just isn't enough to say, "I don't like it," because 'cause they're coming, right? But the whole we talk about this whole speed thing, convenience thing, profitability thing is driving advance right now. It is 100%, no, 93.7% in speed, convenience, price, profit, much more so than societal gain and safety. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Precise statistic as well.
Yeah, thanks, sir.
Your
Yeah,
percentage.
yeah, I worked on that. Anyway, so who owns the data? What's the use for data? And who gets to see the data? Data, for too long, and we learned this with social media, is being consumed without sharing by the people who may not have the same incentive as you do for that data. So, who owns the data? How are they using it? And what access do you have to it? Are some great data questions to ask, even in wayward Waymo cases.
Wayward Waymos. Nice. Yeah. The other concern with AI, though, is does it reduce labor or augment expertise?
Yeah.
So recently, the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, they did a Build for the Future times AI 2025 global study, and they asked C-suite executives to gauge companies' AI maturity. And only about 5% of organizations have managed to reap substantial financial gains from AI. Those are defined as increases to revenue or cash flow, along with significant process and workflow improvements. And then I want to pair this with a recent Harvard Business Review study. When AI was framed as an employee rather than a tool, personal accountability dropped 9 percentage points, and accountability attributed to the AI rose 8 percentage points. The problem? AI systems can't actually be accountable. And the researchers found that real world examples where a company put an AI agent named Kevin on their org chart for HR tasks, when Kevin made mistakes, the team's response was, "Hey, Kevin's making that mistake. Why is he making that mistake?" Redirecting the blame to Kevin, the software, who can't actually own consequences. People caught 18% fewer errors when AI was framed as a colleague. So they give the colleague or the agent the benefit of the doubt and they don't look as critically at some of the work that it's doing. Cognitive fatigue from AI oversight is what they're calling this. And it's this demo versus deployment problem at the organizational level. So AI performs well enough in controlled conditions that people stop checking, but the real world is full of these edge cases, these school buses. And the whole point of human oversight is to catch the ones the model misses. So what do you think?
So again, I see this incredible tension, and that is to make things faster. And there is no doubt that AI, even in the LLMs, but also with the prospect of agentic work, can just compress the time to do amazing things, whether that's produce a request for proposal or to read through a bunch of work or to check inventory or a thousand things. The potential benefit in terms of speed is so alluring, both in terms of just keeping up with the pace of the world, but also reducing human costs, because everyone knows that the cost of your humans is the most expensive thing a business does. So that speed pressure is there, and the technology has the capability to help it. But what we haven't spent much time on are the judgment tasks. And you can't say, well, we'll put a human in the loop or on the loop. Not if
Mm,
not if the
There it
flywheel
is.
not if the flywheel is going so fast, that just isn't gonna happen, right? And if the checkers check 90%, but 10% is a noticeable effect in real downstream here, you stop checking, but stopping checking just because most of what you checked was right is not the way it works. Just because you haven't seen an accident doesn't mean an accident hasn't occurred. And so that tension of it has to become part of our day-to-day work, but not taking it so far that you understand what happens when it fails, who does that fail to? Or what other system does it fail to check? And how do you put those things in place? And again, specifically in agentic AI, when Kevin is out there doing things with a set of Kevin tools that no one understands and no one really gave Kevin permission to do it, who's watching that? So to me, it again comes down to humans who a priori understand the risk of failure in domains to which we're applying the technology, and then either apply the technology with enough guardrails so that you can check for that known risk or decide that technology isn't ready for it as well. Now, the rub is it may be that some of the things we thought were catastrophic failures are not catastrophic failures, right? Because everything can be recovered so much more quickly. But to me, the answer is this. Before you apply AI to an area, can you put enough oversight, whether that is technical oversight or human oversight, to be able to have confidence in it? Or is it not ready to take on that task? But that work has to be done by real humans who are really thinking about lines of business, not just adopting technology because some vendor says that this software can do it for you, and they'll show you a demo and it will, but it just won't put it into your domain and your risk equation. This is another area where the technology, when you start asking questions about it, the questions aren't enough to obviate the use ever, but they are obvious enough to say, I probably need to either constrain, limit, or do more work before I can universally apply it. And I'm not an anti-AI gal. Like, I think we have to. And I think there's some really good things about it, but not if you put it into practice before knowing what the effect is going to be.
Right. And the stakes are getting higher. What happens when the model is wrong? So if we do a Google search and we look for the AI overview or even a ChatGPT search, the wrong answer is just an inconvenience if you're searching for something.
Right.
But when it's being applied in a medical diagnosis or a sentencing recommendation or a drone strike, like is being used in Iran, a wrong answer is irreversible. And that tolerance for error is the real variable.
Yeah, so medicine is one, I'm in that world now, but medicine is a super interesting example. Oh my gosh, I think medicine is one of the great beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries, and already beneficiaries of AI. Can you imagine taking every single mammogram ever taken, knowing the outcome of all of those things and being able to go and find things that you never imagined were there, or correlations or potential or errors or something, in a way that a human couldn't go through all that? I mean, it's unbelievable, and what that can do in pharmaceuticals, taking every single known effect of everything that's been given before and putting it together. I think it's incredibly exciting, unless it's wrong one time. And no one who was using it asked the second question about, just because it is good at all the things I just mentioned doesn't mean the last step is always a ... of all that has gone before. I don't think there's been nearly enough work on the human-machine interaction where you can have automated answers dumped out in someone's decision-making cycle at a place that they can actually use it, rather than a place where they're so pot committed that they've got to go anyway. I've talked about it as an intelligence analyst. You know, to be an intelligence analyst means you're making a recommendation based on information that you know could be wrong. Boy, I think I can sure be helped by machine learning and consumption of lots of data, but it can't ever take away all the risk. What is that precise moment when I can see the product of profound AI computing while still leaving in a place where I can ask that one more question that says, could I be wrong about this? And I don't think we've done nearly enough work on that. So I think the reason we're hitting the wall is not because the technology is hitting a wall. I think it's because the wall is, what can we trust? And how do I account for that?
Yep. And that leads us into some of the questions we want to be asking of our representatives or the people who want to represent us this coming November and in the months to come.
We're going to take and we're going to produce some questions that we think you might want to ask your representatives in various areas. These are exemplars. We will, over the course of the next episodes, capture these and append them to our show notes. Or if you follow me on Substack, I always try and put a listening guide there. So just as you're listening, you don't have to furiously writing these down. Let it wash over you a bit because we'll produce a written version of it. But this is just, we're whetting your appetite. So on AI and education, what a great topic. Back to my college town, I think the real question for across the board education is how do we preserve critical thinking and not just technological fluency? What I say is, as the technology takes over, bring back liberal arts education to teach people how to think, what we're talking about in this episode. I would ask a representative or whatever district they're in or whatever building company, whatever they're trying to produce, say AI is gonna do it. We're gonna use AI for X, Y, and Z. Say, how are you gonna preserve critical thinking in that? How are humans gonna keep up with it? Don't just put more tablets in kids' rooms.
Yeah, I think we should also ask them what their plan is to ensure rural and underserved communities aren't left behind. And this ties back into your infrastructure plan.
Yep. So 2 great questions for the next city councilman, or ask James Talarico this question when he's in his Senate race. These are just really good things. I think you would hear new things from people who represent you, and then they're carrying the things you care about into a world that seems to just be much more about things.
Yep. Well, jobs and the economy is always at the forefront of national elections and local elections too. But what questions would you ask of your politicians re jobs?
Yeah, so even though we'd be talking in the subject of AI, I'd ask the question, "Hey, what are the industries that we're trying to build here instead of merely defend?" Because that's a really great AI question. If we're just merely defending it, I want productivity, right? I just want to turn the crank. If we're trying to build here, what's that investment look like to do it? So even though it sounds, we're talking about technology, I think I would ask the question, hey, what are we doing here? What are we trying to build? What are we trying to defend? Because that helps me understand your understanding of the strengths and weaknesses and risks associated with AI technology.
Do you distinguish between things physically built in your area versus things that you're giving access to? So, for example, the data center doesn't have to be in your zip code for you to use it. But at the same time, are there benefits to having the data center in your zip code?
100%. Great clarification. But tell me then why that's gonna be important to us, and what are the adjacencies, and what are we gonna need, and what it's cost, and what's that gonna do to our power bill? Because see, what happens when you start asking the underlying question, then you start understanding the depth that they're thinking about it and how they're gonna consider it. So, no, for a bunch of places in America, I can see just communities popping up around what becomes a really interesting industry based on this new technology. But what's it gonna do for us, and how are we accounting for it? And what does that mean we're gonna become, right? And sometimes to the point is sometimes you're just defending something bad from happening, preserving our option, not building something new, but talk to me in those ways because then I understand how deeply you are thinking about the system, not just the thing.
And also, who benefits from
Yeah.
your plan, right? Am I your constituent
Yeah.
benefiting, or is it your big donor who subscribed to your PAC and gave you lots of money that's going to get a lot from your AI plan?
So Texas, I mean, we're just staying local because sitting here, really exciting what's happening with the Texas Innovation Center in medicine and the potential to grow here. But looking at who's benefiting from that AI adoption, is it just a new opportunity for big companies to come in here and take money from that new center of societal and social gain? Or are they really pouring into it to make sure that they wanna benefit Central Texas and get rid of two-tier medical systems, right? And how much do they protect that? So, who's benefiting economically, and are they aligned properly with the quest is a good one.
Well, what about government and public service then? Any
Uh,
questions there?
yeah, so the best question is, "Hey, how am I gonna know if you used AI in
Right.
decisions affecting me?" And the answer will be, no matter what they tell you, you will not. They will use AI. So,
I was going to say, is it buried in that terms and conditions?
yeah, it is. But it's a really good question. Say, "Hey, how do I know?" And the reason is, Eric, is the real question with AI is poor Kevin up there. Who's accountable?
Damn it, Kevin.
I know. Who's accountable when the automated systems are wrong, right? There are lots of reasons why a politician or someone seeking to represent you wants to say the words AI. Yay. I want them to be on technological forefront, but I want them to think about the effect of it on us. Because it really is only at the point that you start that you have really good ability to ensure. And so ask it. And if they say, we won't let AI be involved in any decision affecting you, they're
Bzz.
lying. They're lying like a dog. Right.
You're either lying or stupid.
Yeah. But don't hire any of those people. Don't let
Neither
them.
of which is good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the great things about arming citizens with these questions to ask the representatives, because I still believe, I do, that most people are good. The first time you ask it, you're going to get,
Yeah. Deer in the headlights. Yeah.
but the second time it's asked, I believe that they will go off and want to find the answer to that because they'll realize that they haven't done it either. Or at least I have to believe that. All right, pick
Yep.
another area. We're bringing them home.
All right. National security.
Oh,
Near and
good.
dear to our hearts.
What technologies do you think the U.S. has to have independent control over? It
Yeah.
would be the question I would ask. What are the ones? And it's super important to ask of representatives because increasingly the technology isn't being initiated at the government level. So that means
hmm
we're launching and supporting into the wild technologies that are going to have profound impact. It would be nice if we thought about that ahead of time. And interesting enough, as we're building just the wisdom of our citizens, if you knew the answer to this question or someone gave it to you, you would have a much different view of what we should be doing with tariffs.
Yeah, because that's one instrument, right? And also, national security has been our justification for investments in Intel
Yeah.
and also investments in MP materials, right? And that's why we put some of those restrictions on. And I think we both agree a role of government is to protect us with that national security element.
Yep.
But if we also have that competing against the market forces and our capitalism ideals of the best technology should prevail because it's the best and there will be customer demand for it.
That's kind of the super question on the national and economic security is we've talked about the designed tension between lots of different ones, right? Democracy and capitalism, between privacy and security, between this great innovation engine we have that can produce things outside of our control. Should we constrain that? And does that constrain our ability to be technological leaders globally, which we would prefer because not just for our economic security, but also because we're still a nation of laws and that matters. And so the questions about technology around national and economic security, I think, are ones that are trying to tease out. Do we keep that productive friction in place, or are we selling out on only one aspect of what we care about? So to me, I'm on the record of saying if you make me choose between privacy and national security, I'll choose privacy every day of the week and twice on Sundays because I think that is so fundamental to who we are as a nation. But ask the question, tease out the answer. Are you selling out one of the countervailing forces? And are you okay with that?
Yep. And then the granddaddy of them all wouldn't be a Sue Gordon conversation without leadership and our elected leaders. What questions would you ask them about AI and leadership?
I think the first one, and maybe it's the only one you have to ask, is what experts do you trust? Where do you get your information that make you believe that this is true? You should always be able to ask the sources. We try and tell it. Eric, you and I both have biases. We try and, one, we sit across from each other because we, in fact, put each other under tension to try and test the theories. But ask your leaders, especially in technology areas, how are you answering this question for yourself? How are you being able to assure me that you have this under control? What data do you trust? Who do you trust? How about you?
Yeah, that you're not just listening to your pack.
That sits in your district whose jobs numbers are going to rise and fall based on whether you bring this technology in.
Exactly. Yep.
Listen, I think Sam Altman is a really smart guy. I also, when I listen to him, I hear him tell 5 different stories about whether we should be concerned, whether we should not, about even his product in AI. So who are you listening to, and how are you balancing that? What we've tried to show in this episode is how to read the news, how to ask yourself questions about it, and then when people want to represent you, you don't wanna just ask your leaders what they support, you wanna ask them how they think. It sounds like it takes too much time. I promise when you start asking these questions of yourself, you can read a story and know in an instant whether it's chaff, whether it's wheat, or you don't know what the hell it is, you need to ask more questions. You didn't see that one coming. Ha! I made you chuckle. That's
Nope,
amazing right there.
it's good. But what else you watching coming into next week?
So I'm watching Ukraine just because I think they're teaching us in a lot of ways what modern warfare is going to look like. I think it is, in a way, a prototype of future conflicts. I think there are a lot of things, if we had thought about it, could have taught us a lot of things about what's going on in Iran. I think the important signal in Ukraine is not who advanced 3 kilometers. The new signal is what kind of systems survive contact with reality. So I think Ukraine is just a really interesting petri dish of modern warfare.
For sure. I thought the Ukraine conflict was almost over, though. Isn't that what President Putin, old Vlad, said over the weekend at his Victory Day parade?
Yeah, he did. And then our president kind of said, yes, we'll broker something. And then Ukraine said, yeah, you said you were going to, but you didn't. So here's my question. Which war is going to end first, Ukraine or Iran?
Ooh.
Maybe we'll just leave that hanging with a pregnant pause.
Yeah. I think I gotta guess. I think I gotta lean Iran.
I guess, but this is so hubrisy of me. I think there's a way out of this moment. I'm just not sure it's a way out that this current president and his personality can accept. I think you could take the Iran's counterproposal, you could come up with something temporally relevant about the movement in the Strait and even some resolution in terms of weapons, non-nuclear weapons and stuff that you could say, "Great, we've got an agreement, enough for a ceasefire." I think you could even take the nuclear question and push it off and saying, "Since we've obliterated it twice and we can do it another time, we will commit to working on a long-term treaty around that issue." So I might separate the 2 to get out of it. I just don't know if this president can do anything like that. In other words, I think he could get a version of Obama's JCPOA, but I don't think he would allow himself to accept a version of something he got rid of. Never mind that it did in fact keep them from developing a nuclear weapon. But you're saying Iran. Good for you. I'm hopeful. The other thing I'm watching is I'm watching the gap between power and legitimacy widen here at home. And the Supreme Court just weakened another key Voting Rights Act protection at the same time that states continue fights over district maps and representation. And I'm just going to say this as a woman and as someone who's spent a lifetime defending democratic institutions. I think we should be very careful anytime system starts narrowing participation instead of widening it, because we shouldn't be confused. We are certainly at a time of tactical chaos. That chaos can distract from structural change, but even ineffective actors and actions can leave behind durable precedents and new authorities and systems that are very hard to unwind once they become normalized. Kind of my last word for the day is democracies become fragile when people conclude that the system is deciding who counts rather than counting everyone. What do you got? What are you watching?
This week, Trump-Xi summit. President Trump meeting with China's President Xi. Interested to see how that goes. It's been kind of several months in the offing. Shifted right a few times because of the Iran conflict, but I'm a little nervous about it, frankly. I think conditions are set for President Trump to try to make a deal or to want to have a big splash. And I'm not sure that anything that comes out of this is going to be in our best interest.
Yeah, I think it's a trap. And not in the creepy kind of trap. I think anyone watching us right now sees us over our skis, scattered and not consistent And with midterm elections coming up, we are still a democracy and leaders still care about winning elections. And so I think you're right to be concerned that we talk about patient adversaries and competitors. China's a patient player, and even though their interests are intertwined with ours, I think they have some opportunity to put pressure on us where we can't afford pressure and therefore gain things we wouldn't have preferred to give.
I'm hoping we have more leverage, though. They aren't in the best of
Mhm.
circumstances themselves, right? Some of their oil restricted coming out of changes in leadership in Venezuela, hardships coming out of Iran and the Straits, and also domestically, they have issues with their aging population and some of the dynamics there. But I don't know that those, especially the latter, is really acute enough to affect the circumstances compared to what we're facing in the United States.
I think there's just a bit of a timing problem here where our clock speed and our urgency right now is we need resolution on some of these issues.
Yeah.
And those things you mentioned are really profoundly problematic for China. But I can say this as an intelligence officer for a long time. It is generally folly to predict the imminent demise of an authoritarian regime just because the economics don't look good. So
Well, there you go.
I think their problems are huge, but the temporal nature of ours gives them ability to trade more strategically on outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe this trip is how you get your resolution to the Iran war. China could certainly help that if we could figure out how to
Yeah.
get them. So maybe that's it. Hey, you are so smart, Eric.
Inshallah.
There you go.
Well, that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Now, I say this every week, but I'm going to say it again really this time. We would love to hear what you think of our direction. Speak now. If you love this episode, we'll try and keep making it better. If you're like, oh my gosh, what are you guys doing? Let us know that too. Send us a note because we are honestly here for you. And I think this world is both really disrupted and, as I said at the opening, a really great time for opportunity. So weigh in and help us offer you something useful. So join us next week and each week for Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another because it makes all the difference.